Okay, seniors, today we're looking at Chapter 9, and we're looking at our system, focusing on our government, money coming in the form of taxes. Later on, we'll be looking at money going out, expenditures. And so let's get to it. Okay. All right, so one of the things to understand is we spend a lot of money on a lot of the different services that we've come to expect. And it's one of those things where we don't really think about where money comes from. We just see things and accept it. You know, we see sidewalks and we accept the sidewalks, and we see schools, we see roads and parks, and we just assume just comes out of nowhere, but everything must be paid for. Okay, so the money that is used to pay for everything is taxes. Now that includes when we borrow money. Eventually, we got to still pay that money back, and that all comes from taxes. Okay, so even if you borrow, you still have to pay back, and that all comes from taxes. So all money. Okay, so again, as we increase the number of services, we have to increase taxes. Okay, and taxes have increased over time. And so, in any given year, when the government spends more than it brings in taxes, it has to borrow the excess, what's left over. Okay, so a yearly shortfall is called a deficit, federal deficit. Okay, now if we add up all of our deficits, our running tab, our total sum of all money still to be paid, that's the federal debt. Okay, so there's two different terms. There's the deficit, okay, which we have right here, and we have the debt. Okay, and that number is actually moving closer to about 17.9. We'll be in 18 trillion pretty soon. Okay, so the government, you need to understand, this is really critical. Um, Businesses are motivated by profit. They must become efficient. And one of the best ways to increase the bottom line in the short term is by cutting costs. Now, over time, you can increase revenue, but usually it's by cutting costs. And so government doesn't really think that way. There really is no profit motive. So because of that, because there's no competition, there is no motivator to get better, to provide a better product at a lower price, because that's what companies are always trying to do. And so, again, for what we expect is that government keep increasing its services, and so that is why our taxes usually tend to get higher over time. Okay, gross domestic product, the total value of all products and services produced within our borders. Another way to look at total gross domestic product is how much money are we generating inside of the United States. Now that includes foreign companies operating in the United States. For instance, Toyota. Most of the Toyotas that you see driving around in America are made in America. And so although Toyota is a Japanese company and profits from sales will flow back to Japan, right? Ultimately to all shareholders, no matter where they live in the world. We count those earnings in America's GDP. Now, just the flip side, a factory operating in another country, the value of that product we would not count in our GDP. Okay, and you can see over time our GDP has grown tremendously. You know, since 1975 to 2005, we've seen, from 1 trillion to 12 trillion. That's amazing. Okay. Also, our national debt has grown tremendously during that time too. Now, another way to look at this is not just pure numbers, because you need to understand $1 trillion back in 1975 means more than $1 trillion now, because prices have been increasing over time. So this is another way to look at it, is gross federal debt as a percentage of GDP, and we can see a little bit of a dippage here. Those were the years where there was a government shutdown back in the Bill Clinton years and things like that. Okay, so we need to understand, what does it mean when we increase taxes? Okay, so when taxes are increased, meaning people have to pay money to the government, well, that's less money in your pocket. Okay, and same thing when businesses pay taxes, that's less money that they have to do other things with their business. Okay, so when there's less money available, then factories tend to cut production. Okay, and then the way they do that, the way they cut back on expenses is by laying off people, and then those people who've been laid off buy less stuff. In fact, people who are not laid off but are concerned about reductions in production, they also buy less stuff. So this cycle gets going, and so as people are buying less stuff, companies make less stuff. As companies make less stuff, they lay off more people. When people are laid off, and you can see this is like a downward cycle. So we call this a recessionary cycle. Okay. Now, another way to look at taxes and their effects is to look at how people choose to allocate resources. Okay, so if we increase the tax on a product, then companies will shift to a different product. So, for instance, if we put a tax on metal, then we might see more plastic and more composites and things like that showing up on cars and toys and airplanes and things like that. Okay, so that's the idea. If we put a tax on one thing, people might shift to something else because the cost of it is now higher. Remember, taxes on products raise the cost of those products. Likewise, if people shift their shift their purchasing because of taxes, businesses may also shift to creating products that are not taxed as much. Okay, so if a company is forbidden, and we sometimes do these laws where they're not allowed to move into another area, then what we'll see is the company will just reduce their production and they won't increase their production somewhere else. So usually that means lots of people getting laid off and people not being hired somewhere else. Taxes can be used as a way to decrease people's usage of certain products. So cigarettes, it's a great example. Alcohol, great example. There are alcohol tax and tobacco taxes, things like that. And they do two things. They raise money, okay, and they limit, as we talked about before, people use the product a little bit less because it costs so much. So one thing to understand regarding taxes, this is interesting. There comes a point when if taxes are too high, then people might decide that they're better off not working. Okay, and so we have a two-parent household. If taxes are too high, then it may make more economic sense to actually have one person stay home. Now, there's some benefits to that, non-monetary benefits to one person staying home, taking care of kids, taking care of the house, and things like that. That's a whole another issue. But in terms of productivity, just look at that one little piece right there. Higher taxes will move more people into that role of not working, and because of that, you'll have less workers available. Okay, so that's what we call a labor shortage, where there's not enough workers to fulfill a basic need. So when we're looking at taxes, another aspect of taxes is fairness. And fair can mean different things to different people, and our government takes a takes basically tries to split the difference, and different taxes that we have in our system utilize different concepts of fairness. Okay, so the benefit principle is this idea that, hey, if you're using a service that the government provides, you should pay for it. Good example of this is a toll bridge or a turnpike where you have to pay to use it. So the idea is if you want to use it, you pay for it. Here in Spring Valley, we have Highway 125 going down to the border, and it's not very well used. A lot of people will just pay more and go around, but some people, they'll pay more and use that as a way to save some time and not have to sit in as much traffic. Now, for folks that do not have the ability to pay, um, then they have a hard time using that product, and they may avoid that product altogether. So obviously, the poor are going to be hurt the most in the benefit principle. Now, another concept is something called the ability to pay principle, and this is this idea that, hey, the more money you make, the more you should be paying, meaning you have more ability to pay. And so this is interesting because when we look at the rich, this is not really looking at what services a person is drawing from society. This is looking at a person's ability to pay. That's all that's being looked at. So that's an interesting thing. So typically, those who are poorer draw more benefits from the government, and those who are more wealthy draw less benefits. Okay, so I mean, the basic idea there is you have more money, so it doesn't hurt you as much to pay more. Okay, there's three ways to set this up. One is proportional, one is progressive, and the other is regressive. Okay, so proportional tax, everybody pays the same percentage regardless of income level. So when you look at your Social Security, I think it's what 2% of your earnings. Everybody pays it, and so regardless if you're rich or poor, you're going to pay Social Security. You're also going to pay into Medicare. Okay, and another term for proportional tax is a flat tax. Okay, our federal income tax, as well as California's income tax, when you do your taxes in the, beginning of the year, um, the idea is the more you make, not only are you paying more because you make more, but you're paying even more because you pay a higher percentage. And those who are very poor, they have a 0% tax rate, so they pay nothing. The very, very poor pay or the slightly poor pay a lot less, a much lower percentage. Now, regressive tax means it's the idea is when you're poor, and again, this is not necessarily higher, the poorer pay more taxes. The concept is that everybody pays the same amount. So if you if you buy a hamburger, okay, let's say you're poor and you buy a hamburger, and you'll pay sales tax on that. A rich person buying the same hamburger would pay the same exact tax. So because it's the same amount, regardless of your earnings level, it's regressive, meaning, I mean, this sounds the same as proportional. Everybody pays the same percentage, but it's not, because with proportional, a millionaire is going to pay a lot more than somebody who's not making that much money. A regressive tax, everybody pays the same amount for each product that they use. And so that's, typically what we'll see is a person who's wealthy is buying more stuff, so they'll be paying more of those taxes. But on a per product basis, everybody pays the same amount, so the poor are hurt the most. This is a W-2 form, and if you work, you'll get something like this at the right around the end of January is the law states you must get this, and this tells lots of interesting bits of information. Okay, so this person here, um, you know, uh, Joe Bruin, 1234 Westwood Boulevard. Again, this is a made-up person. Nobody has that Social Security number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, so this person made $14,418.39. Okay, now from that, $1,200 was pulled out. Now, when you do your taxes, what you're gonna figure out is did how much do you actually owe? That's just how much that was withheld. It's a guess. Now, if you have more kids, you have more. Again, that's more exemptions, things like that, you'll pay less. If there are different things that can